Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 3rd of October, and as always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. You can do that very easily by calling the Alaska Weather Information Line, 1-800-472-0391. Find us online at weather.gov/Alaska, or use the different offices there at the end, weather.gov/Fairbanks or Anchorage or Juneau will get you to the same place, or weather.gov/AAWU for all of your flying weather needs for general aviation, and of course substitute in APRFC for the latest information about your rivers and streams around Alaska, and of course a river watch to come in well, several months from now. If you ever have any questions about what you're finding here on the show or online or anything that has to do with the National Weather Service, I'm always happy to help you. David.Snider@noaa.gov is the easiest way to find me. Here's a look at what's going on around Alaska here. Coming up, hazardous weather concerns mainly due to wind across the Yukon Delta and upriver there. A high wind watch is now posted. That'll take us into Wednesday afternoon and Wednesday night, as well as parts of the Bering Strait seacoast, including St. Lawrence Island and the western end of the Seward Peninsula. The main concerns here will be for the southeast and easterly winds wrapping around a powerful area of low pressure that's moving in from the west and southwest that will eventually make landfall perhaps around Friday or so. But right now it looks like, Thursday, but it looks like this wind is going to pick up well ahead of that. And because of that, we think that winds might be as strong as 40 to 50 miles an hour with those gusts. So some damage is possible with that, with some of those stronger gusts. A little bit further east across some of the higher terrain in the Alaska range, you're looking at south winds blowing through, and this will primarily be Wednesday night into Thursday morning when the winds will be the strongest, stretching all the way from the Denali region into the eastern Alaska range and the Deltana and Tanana Flats region. Those winds could gust anywhere from 50 to 60 miles per hour, again from the south and a little bit more from the east and southeast here for our west coast communities. Here's a look at the weather situation right now. You're not going to find a really massive area of low pressure on the map just yet. You will find some of the precursors, though, some of those across the eastern Gulf, spreading rain into parts of southeast, a little bit of a break, and then another wave of low pressure and rain working across the west coast. We've got fog up across the north this afternoon and this evening, and out west we have this minor disturbance that's working across the western chain there and into the western Bering Sea. The issue at hand, though, is that a very powerful North Pacific jet stream running around 140 to 170 knots is going to interact with that system and spin that into high gear, just as if you put your hands on a top and put the top down on the table and gave it a good push. It's exactly what's going to happen with the surface low pressure system in the next 24 hours. And as it moves into the western Bering Sea, it could drop on the order of 10 to 20 millibars here in about 24 hours. So it will quite literally bomb out, as we say in a meteorological expression. Here's a look at the surface chart right now. And once again, you're not going to see a really powerful storm just yet. Low pressure across the northern Gulf here at 1,005 millibars, spreading rainfall into the central outer coast as well as into parts of Yakutat. Going to be some rough seas here tonight and tomorrow in this region. Watch for areas along the Brooks Range to see some hints of rain showers mixing with snow, and across the west coast we've had some pockets of heavier rainfall in the Yukon River Valley. Bristol Bay looking at rainfall and pockets of rain still across the central Aleutians. Our lowest low pressure system at 996 millibars, but overnight that's going to drop to about 972 millibars, and you can see the isobars starting to pack in here, telling us that the pressure is deepening around this central core and winds will pick up as a result. The winds will start to really move around St. Paul and St. George, St. Matthew, and we'll start to see that stronger east and southeasterly flow later tonight and into tomorrow for places like St. Lawrence Island, the Yukon River regions, and parts of Norton Sound, you'll start to see those stronger winds initially. Across the Gulf, not so bad. You will have a little bit of a breeze across southeast with periods of rain developing there and pockets of rain and snow showers up across the north. By Wednesday afternoon, we're down to 961 millibars. Low pressure is moving eastward here. This is probably when we'll see some of the strongest winds for the Bering Strait community, St. Lawrence Island and the Yukon Valley here. And once again, winds could gust on the order of 40 to 50 miles per hour from the east and southeast. And because of that, there is a high wind watch posted for your region. Now, low pressure will be across the central Gulf. There's enough instability here for some thunderstorms offshore, and we will still have a slight risk for some light rainfall across parts of southeast. The winds shouldn't be too terribly bad across the Alaska Range just yet if you have to make it across. We'll watch for areas of light rain and snow across the North Slope, and fog may still be a possibility across the Beaufort Seacoast. Winds will also be an issue coming in behind this as that south and westerly fetch moves across the southern Bering Sea. High surf may be an issue for many of our southwest coast facing communities there, so keep watch on that. By Thursday, low pressure is ashore at 976 millibars. Another part of that is in the northern Gulf now at 989 millibars. Gales, probably some strong gales across the northern Gulf around the Yakutat region should be expected. Periods of rain and heavy rain for southeast. Showers and passing areas of more moderate rainfall for south central and southwest. And again, the wind will be the issue for most of the YK Delta and the Bering Strait communities here. We'll watch to see how that high wind slowly tapers off across the Bering Strait region, but don't be surprised to have higher gusts throughout your Thursday there. And for the Alaska Range, those gusts will likely stay up at least into Wednesday morning before the front passes and that pressure gradient begins to subside. But for our southwest coast communities there, we'll be watching for that long fetch across the Bering Sea to interact with the water, and it could be some choppy conditions there. The good news is that some of the worst wind conditions that we'll see during this period don't seem to interact with some of the higher tides of the year. So hopefully that works in your community's favor there. But do let us know, and please do report any damage if you have any. Here's a look at temperatures across the region as we go into Wednesday morning. Once again, the big low pressure system's well to our west. So out ahead of this, we're seeing temperatures in the 20s and 30s in the north, 30s and 40s across the YK Delta into Bristol Bay. South Central, you're looking at overnight lows tonight back in the mid-40s. So certainly milder than it's been for the last couple nights, and lower to mid-40s for many parts of southeast. Nome 36, Fairbanks close to 40, Anchorage about 45 or so, and Kodiak 42 with the capital city in the lower 40s. High temperatures for your Wednesday will be a little milder up north, 30s and 40s for the North Slope there, 37 in Barrow, 41 in Wainwright, Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse in the upper 30s. Look at Fairbanks. With southerly winds moving over the mountains toward your location, you're back in the mid-50s in some cases. YK Delta back in the mid to upper 40s. Bristol Bay close to 50 degrees. Even milder around Dutch Harbor and Unalaska. St. Paul close to 50 degrees. And southeast in the lower 50s with Sitka near 56. And Anchorage in the lower 50s, about the same there in Kodiak. Overnight low temperatures going into Thursday morning. You'll see temps closer to the freezing point across the North Slope of the Brooks Range, Anaktuvuk Pass just below freezing there. Nome at 39, most of the YK Delta holding in the lower 40s with South Central also in the lower to mid 40s to start Thursday morning. Southeast, we expect to see morning temperatures in the lower to mid 40s there. Kodiak Island about 45, and Dutch Harbor and Unalaska a little bit closer to the 47-degree mark there, and 46 in St. Paul and St. George. As we get into the afternoon, remember, low pressure is still working its way into the YK Delta at this point, so we have a lot of warm air spreading inland, and temperatures won't change much. In fact, you can see that warm air creeping up the Yukon Valley. Temperatures still holding in the upper 40s to mid-50s around the upper Yukon, and not really that far behind it out across parts of Southwest. For South Central, look for highs in the lower to mid-50s there, 54 in Kodiak. Southeast, we expect to see Thursday temperatures in the lower 50s. The North Slope is still remaining fairly mild there with that strong southerly flow working across the mountains and keeping things fairly tame across the Arctic coast. High temperatures will only be in the mid to upper 30s, so not terribly cold at all. We'll start to see some changes out here across the Aleutians, though, as that air is changing from west to east. So we'll watch for changing conditions there across the west coast as low pressure moves even further east and starts to drag in some of the cooler weather as we head toward the end of the week. More on that anytime at weather.gov.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
On flying weather now, you can see a wide swath of IFR spreading out ahead of the zone of low pressure in the western Bering Sea. It's a deep one, and as it spreads moisture across the west coast, you'll notice the winds and visibility changing throughout your Wednesday, all the way from Norton Sound and the Seward Peninsula into Bristol Bay, along the Alaska Peninsula and the chain. For many in southeast, you'll start off with VFR throughout the day, another area of low pressure here across the Gulf, pushing IFR into the northern Gulf Coast coastline itself. That will thin out a little bit more as we head into the afternoon. MVFR starts to spread into Chilkoot and White Pass and parts of the outer coast, as well as some of the northern bays. Across the west coast, MVFR spreads into the YK Delta with IFR from St. Lawrence Island down to Nunivak Island and into the southern tip of the Alaska Peninsula and east of Dutch Harbor in Unalaska, with widespread MVFR across the Chukchi Seacoast and around the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range. By Thursday morning, widespread IFR is expected from the Seward Peninsula, St. Lawrence Island, back to St. Matthew, and most of the YK Delta, as low pressure is right about here, forcing moisture up into the valleys there, all the way up the Yukon, you can see there, and across some of the higher terrain for the Seward Peninsula. For the eastern Gulf Coast, IFR is also lingering across the outer coastline, with MVFR spreading into the northern bays and passes there, as well as some along the southern outer coast now, and IFR just offshore of the Kenai Peninsula and parts of the Alaska Range, and also near the Beaufort Seacoast, with MVFR lingering there. For Thursday afternoon, IFR is expected across most of the interior passes there for southeast, as well as Chilkoot and White Pass up toward the Copper River Basin, and as you can see across the YK coastline from Nunivak Island all the way from just about the northern end of the Yukon Delta south of Cape Newenham and into Bristol Bay, with MVFR for most of the Bering Sea and really most of the interior as we go through your Thursday. Pass conditions then for Anaktuvuk Pass tomorrow. VFR heading over toward MVFR. We expect similar conditions there for Adigan Pass. As we go into the Alaska Range, Lake Clark and Merrill Pass expected to be marginal through most of the day, and similar conditions developing and holding there for Rainy Pass as well as Windy Pass developing toward MVFR. Isabel Pass expected to hold at VFR conditions through most of your Wednesday. Changes again expected there Thursday. Mentasta Pass heading toward marginal conditions during the afternoon. The morning might be okay. Tanita Pass, we expect to see marginal conditions there through most of your Wednesday. And Portage Pass, starting at IFR, may see some improvements as the afternoon goes on, especially on the east side. And Chilkoot and White Pass will see changing conditions as we go through your Wednesday. Freezing levels indicate a lot of warm air sitting across the southern Bering Sea. Levels there as high as 12,000 feet for the central chain, but there is colder air trying to move in across the west coast. Again, this will be moving eastward, so warmer air is heading for the west coast, moving away some of that colder air across the central and western interior, and there's plenty of warmth across southeast as well. Levels there anywhere from about 10 to about 12,000 feet, with the interior levels between 4 and 6. Surface freezing lines holding up across the eastern Beaufort Seacoast and the parts of Kaktovik all the way down toward Arctic Village could start out at that colder level. Icing potential then is going to be hit and miss. There should be some widespread precipitation, so again that's going to limit the amount of icing threats there, and again levels are fairly high for general aviation. Most areas are looking at levels for icing potential above 10,000 feet. One exception though is going to be the north slope there. There's some areas from the central and western areas of the Beaufort Seacoast to Point Barrow, and then some of the easternmost regions of the Chukchi Coast above 4,000 feet could be looking at some isolated moderate tomorrow. The jet stream has a pronounced trough sitting across the western Gulf and the North Pacific there, guiding very strong and almost due north winds coming in 115 on the speed there, 115 knots into eastern Canada as well. But the really powerful part of this picture is that west-east blowing jet stream, 140 to 170 knots. That's powering the Bering Sea low, both aloft and at the surface. So as we get into Wednesday at 9,000 feet, you can see that here. Wind speeds between 40 and 55, maybe even 60 knots on the south side of the system, and stronger winds will be coming in behind that. That's going to push a lot of wind into the west and southwesterly coast. Lighter winds, but still a southerly flow for most of the Gulf and southeast, anywhere from 20 to 35 knots. The interior, 25 to 30 knots there, and a south and easterly flow moving away from the Seward Peninsula at 9,000 feet for your Wednesday. At 3,000 feet, similar conditions here. Stronger winds west of the Alaska Range, 55 to 60 knots or so on Wednesday. And you're looking at about the same speeds there across the southern Bering from St. Paul all the way up to St. Matthew and down to the Aleutians. Wind speeds could be a little bit lighter there south of the chain. Here's a look at turbulence, and we expect some rough flying conditions there across the YK Delta and through the chain tomorrow, generally below 4,000 feet. That's a look at your aviation weather. Back in a few minutes with the rest of your sea ice and marine weather.
We have cleaned over 1,500 miles of shoreline now.
Basically, it comes down to just human muscle. I mean, we use chainsaws and knives.
We find stuff from like Russia and China and Korea, Vietnam, Malaysia. It really doesn't matter where it comes from. We all just have to clean it out.
Our goal right now in the next 10 or 11 days before the end of this year is just to see how much we can collect before we get to remove it.
What you see on the beach is a fraction of what's out there. You can pretty much break it down into 3 or 4 things. Water bottles, a lot of water bottles, styrofoam, fishing nets, fishing buoys. And that's 99% of what you find on the beach. Basically just go along with chainsaws and muscle and get the garbage, put it in sacks, and then from there we haul it up above the log jam so it's out of any heavy surf or winter storms if it's going to stay there for the year, and put it in super sacks. So yeah, we just progressively work down the coast, just day in and day out.
We have like daily goals for ourselves that, like, if we're working at a pretty good rate, we like to keep on pace with about, like, I don't know, about 20 to 25 super sacks a day. So this is pile 102, and in this pile right now we have 2 super sacks and 1 set of buoys. June 23rd here, this is what we've done today. We're up to 25 super sacks on the day, and I think for now we'll call it and just keep cleaning until tomorrow.
My name is Hannah, and I represent a organization in Japan called Japan Environmental Action Network. With over 20 people working together to clean up the beach, this is amazing. Like, we all need to work together to, clean up the beach as much as possible. So like every single time I go back to Japan, I talk to the fishermen, and the fishermen's like, it's a joke, but they're like, if you find any buoy with my logo, you gotta bring it back, and it's like, always looking out for that stuff.
The crew's awesome. I mean, we're all skiers or snowboarders, and we're all friends. I mean, we're all good friends. My dad started it. He's the man behind the desk. He makes the ball roll for sure. He works hard. He doesn't give up easy, which is good.
This stuff is uplifted quite a ways during the earthquake. Well, I think my bag's about full already. Yep. I'm gonna take a quick look back in here, see what else is back here. The thing about marine debris is it's kind of a hidden problem. Unless you're out there, especially on these remote beaches that are so heavily impacted, people don't see it. I remember probably a good 20 years ago, I was out on the outside of Montague Island, flew out there, and I was just utterly astounded by all the garbage out there. You walk out there and you wade through this stuff and you go, this isn't right, this shouldn't happen.
I think a lot of it's just awareness. I mean, I've been boating out here for a long time, and I wasn't even aware of how extensive the marine debris problem is out here, but it's a consumer world out there for sure. I mean, I don't know where people's values are, I guess, but mine is you got to kind of have a little bit of respect for the environment, and considering we live in it, especially in Alaska. I mean, a lot of people like the outdoors and like to be part of the outdoors. That's why they live here, and it's they don't necessarily want to see it trashed.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Time for a quick check of your sea ice across the North Slope. We are seeing cold enough temperatures now for grease ice to form across parts of the Beaufort Seacoast, especially around the Prudhoe Bay region, but don't be surprised to find more grease ice anywhere east of Barrow all the way out toward Demarcation Point. Most of the pack ice, of course, is still well away, looking at 350 to almost 400 nautical miles well north of the coast, a little bit closer to Kaktovik, but the bulk of it is still well away. Anytime you want to check the latest on the sea ice conditions, weather.gov/Anchorage/ice for the analysis and outlook. In southeast, winds are coming up there. We'll have some gales across the north and eastern Gulf there outside of Yakutat, a southeast wind up to 40 knots with a 14-foot sea. Southerlies also picking up a little bit more across the inside passages there, 3 to 4 foot seas on the south and southeasterly wind. And look for some stronger end gales there. Outside of Sitka, gusts of 45 knots with 25 knots sustained, 12-foot seas and 11-foot seas further down the coast. As we get into Thursday, you can still see that broad southerly flow. The strongest winds move up outside of Cross Sound, gusting to 45 knots with an 11-foot sea, and then across the northern Gulf, 30 knots sustained with 11 to 13-foot seas. Inside, the winds really come up sharply, 20 to 30 knots with gusts anywhere from 30 to 35 knots across Stevens Passage all the way down to Clarence Strait, looking at 4 to 6-foot seas on the inside for southeast on Thursday. For South Central, fairly tame conditions in comparison there for Wednesday. Southerlies light inside of Prince William Sound, 10 knots, 2-foot seas, and southerlies up to 15 knots across Cook Inlet west of the Barrens, and looking at 7, even 6-foot seas just east of the Barrens there across the northern Gulf waters for Wednesday. Thursday, a little bit of a change there as low pressure ramps up. Westerlies start to blow across the northern Gulf, 30 to 35 knots, 11 to 14-foot seas there, and more of a southerly push coming into areas up toward Montague Island. Southeasterlies inside of Prince William Sound at 25 knots, and south and westerlies inside of Cook Inlet 20 to 30 knots with 6 to 9-foot seas there, especially south of Clam Gulch. As we get into Bristol Bay, southeasterlies 30 knots tomorrow with an 8-foot sea. Southerlies down the Alaska Peninsula, Bering Sea coastline, and southwesterlies ramp up across the north and western Gulf. And also down into the Pacific coastline of the Alaska Peninsula with 13-foot seas developing there, 20 knots inside of Shelikof Strait. For Thursday, substantial winds and high seas, storm force out across the Pribilofs. Some of that will try and send higher seas and surf into Bristol Bay and the Alaska Peninsula. So keep watch on that with strong westerlies developing up to storm force. 45 knots in many cases there closer to the coast, 20 to 24 feet, and across the Pacific coast 30 to 40 knots with 13 to 16-foot seas expected, 12-foot seas inside of Shelikof Strait. For the Aleutians, a south and westerly flow for the central and eastern chain, 40 to 45 knots. You're looking at seas up to 17 feet in many cases in the east, 16 to 22 feet in the west, and 18 to 23 feet across the Pacific coast. Again, the brighter colors indicate higher seas as we go, and you can see that surge moving eastward as we go into Thursday, taking with it the higher swells and higher surf conditions. For most of the chain, you're looking at 30 to 35 knots. The strongest winds will be just north of Unalaska, 40-knot winds sustained from the west with a 22-foot sea. Many areas along the Pacific coast, 15 to 17 feet, and you're looking at about 14 to 18 feet as you get into the central and western chain. Now for the west, this is where we think we'll see some high surf conditions, perhaps across the south and west. Keeping watch for that. We're going to have gales and storm force winds across most of the central and northern Bering. Watch for 40 to 45 knots in most areas, 13 to 16 foot seas. By Thursday, a much stronger push with storm force winds developing Wednesday night into Thursday morning for the Pribilofs, 50 knots, 29 foot seas, 26 foot seas across areas north of Cape Newfoundland up to Nunivak Island, and westerlies north of Nunivak Island with a 22-foot sea and a 50-knot westerly wind. Up north, easterly strengthened for the eastern Beaufort Seacoast, 35 knots with an 11-foot sea. Light winds across most of the Chukchi coast for your Wednesday. Those should pick up a little bit more as we get into Thursday and then ramp down quickly by the afternoon. Easterlies blowing 10 to 15, northeasterlies down the Chukchi coast, and stronger northerlies as you head down towards St. Lawrence Island for your Thursday. Recapping tonight's weather, a strong storm is developing and will continue to deepen and strengthen as it moves from west to east quickly as we head into tonight. Watch for rain across the Gulf Coast and strong winds developing across the southwest coast with a high wind watch there, and a gentle reminder for high surf potential across the southwest coast. No warnings or watches for that just yet. A high wind watch for the Bering Sea coast as well as we get into Wednesday afternoon. For Wednesday night, high wind watch for the eastern Alaska Range and Denali. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather. You can find this and more online anytime at weather.gov/Alaska.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.